Hello, welcome to Sunday School here at Temple Baptist Church. We have been this quarter in the book of Mark. We're on the last lesson of Mark, session 13. We're going to be in Mark chapter 16, verses 1 through 14. And I will say without hesitation, this is probably well known by everybody. It is the fact that Jesus is alive. It is the fact that Jesus arose from the tomb. And I'm probably not going to be able to tell you anything new today, but if at least I can bring to remembrance some of the things that Mark is teaching here, some of the things Mark has taught us, and just as a introduction, and of course we'll look at understanding the context a little bit, but let's say you have purchased an item and you want to take it back and you do not have the sales slip. I don't know how many of you keep those. Usually that's the first thing I get rid of when I buy something, because I usually have no intentions of taking it back, but I have done that. But if the merchant wants to be gracious, so they will take it back without a receipt. But proof of purchase, though, is the surest way to get them to believe that you made the purchase at their store, from their store. So there's advantages to that. And what we're going to be looking at here today is witnesses to the resurrection, witnesses to the empty tomb, witnesses that were told that he is not here, he is risen, and all the things that are there, the encounter that the two on the road to Damascus had with Jesus, and then he is going to appear to his disciples, and it's just to me, it's the infallible proofs that Jesus arose from the grave. That is the cornerstone of our belief, is the fact that he arose from the dead. Anybody can die, and we're all going to die, so anybody could die. Anybody could be placed in that tomb that he was placed in, but not everybody could come out of that tomb alive and ascend to the throne. So, and Jesus is, he's entered a world here that really has a variety of beliefs on what awaits people in the afterlife. And I guess we could say today we probably still have a lot of that. The Pharisees was one of the two main religious parties in Judaism, and they believed in the resurrection of the body, the last judgment, rewards, and punishment. The other main religious party, the Sadducees, they denied the resurrection and had no developed concept of what happened after death. The Pharisees believed resurrection was possible. The Sadducees did not. And of course, the old joke about that, they didn't believe in the resurrection, so they're sad, you see. They're the Sadducees. Old Testament Jews, I think, had believed that the departed was gathered in Shiloh, the place of the dead. They didn't have a full developed sense of what happened after death. They didn't have that. There's instances where afterlife is affirmed in the Old Testament. I'll give you some places you can look that up. Job chapter 13 and verse 15, Psalms chapter 16 verses 10 and 11, Psalms 49, 15, 70, Psalms 73, 24, and 26. So, it's there. It's just the concept of it, believing it and accepting it. Greeks believed that the soul was immortal and that all people would go to the same place. They called it Hades, which was a dreary place without future rewards or punishment. So, it's that. And so in this world of confusion and sometimes opposing ideologies of life after death, Jesus delivers proof of life after death. Now, it's sunrise on Sunday morning. We know that. Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, Salome took spices to the tomb to anoint the body of Jesus. And while they're on the way, they have a discussion. Who's going to roll the stone away from the empty tomb? Who's going to roll the stone away from the tomb? They didn't know it was empty at that time. Who's going to roll the stone away from the tomb because it's heavy? How are we going to do that? And then when they enter the tomb, the young man is white, is sitting inside, and he tells them that Jesus has risen. He invites them to view the place where the body lays, and so he does that, and he tells them to go tell the disciples and Peter that he would see them in Galilee. It's just what he had promised, just what he had told them. And so the women leave the tomb overwhelmed with what's happening, overwhelmed with what's doing that. That same day, Jesus appears to Mary Magdalene. She reports what she saw, but the disciples didn't believe her. Still, they're not believing. Jesus also appeared to those two men I talked about earlier that were walking in the country, and they did not believe, when they're reporting what they had seen. Later they did that. But Jesus appears to his disciples, and then he commissions them. He has told them, to wait for him, and he will meet with them, and then that's going to happen. So we'll read through our text, make a few comments about that as we go, and see what we can glean out of this. See what we can bring fresh to our minds. Sometimes it's best. Sometimes it's good just to be reminded that Jesus actually rose from the grave. It was miraculous. The stone wasn't rolled away to let Jesus out. The stone was rolled away to let the women in to see that Jesus was not there. Jesus didn't need anybody to roll the stone away. He come out of there in a new resurrected body and a glorified body. So he didn't need that stone out of the way for him to get out. The stone was out of the way for the women to get in, the witnesses to get in and see the place where Jesus lay. And so when we start in Mark chapter 16 and verse 1, we'll read through verse 4. When the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James and Salome had brought sweet spices that they might come and anoint him. And very early in the morning, the first day of the week, they came unto the tomb at the rising of the sun. And they said among themselves, Who shall roll away the stone from the door of the tomb? And when they looked, they saw that the stone was rolled away, for it was very great. Okay, here we are. They're coming to back to the tomb. They had been there. I believe they were there when they laid him in the tomb, and because of the Sabbath and the things that were happening, they were forbidden to do anything till after the Passover and things that were going on. After when the Sabbath was passed, then they could do that. And let me ask this question, and I know we're not in a state where you can answer me, but if I'm going to tell a story or write a story, and I want everyone to believe it, and especially if it almost seems like an impossible reality. This is something that is really off the wall, I guess you'd say. Really, the resurrection of Jesus, confirms the fact that there is life after death. Like I said, talked about all those others, what they believed about it, what was going on at that time. But, so you would think, or I would anyhow, begin with a group of witnesses whose testimony would really be valued in a courtroom. If you're going to go to court, you're going to go to try to prove this story that you are telling, then you want some credible witnesses. But he begins his testimony with a group of women, and their word, bless their heart, at that stage of time was not acceptable in a court of law. It was not acceptable. They would not be allowed to testify. And so, this happens on a Sunday. The Sabbath would have ended on Saturday at sundown. but the women had to wait until daylight to come and do that. And, the first one that is mentioned here is Mary Magdalene, and she was one of Jesus that had believed and had 7 demons cast from her. With her, the mother Mary, the mother of James, and the disciples sometimes call James the Less. She had been with Mary Magdalene at the cross of Jesus, and when they laid Jesus in the tomb, they were there. And Salome, she was also with Jesus at the cross. She was the mother of James and John. And so together, these women come to the grave to finish the job that they couldn't finish when Jesus was laid in the tomb because of the Sabbath. And so, they come to anoint his body with spices, and Mark adds the detail that it was in the morning, the first day of the week, which was Sunday at the rising of the sun. They were getting out there early. Get out there and get this done. And then, so 1 and 2 kind of tells us what's going on there. And then 3 and 4, and they said among themselves. And, Matthew reveals that the tomb is guarded by soldiers, though the woman would have likely known that. They didn't know that fact because they were there. They would, but they wondered aloud who would roll away the stone from the door of the tomb. And I can say this stone, they tell me, was a circular stone that was set in a groove, and then it was rolled down in front of the opening of the tomb, and it was on an incline, and the women just would not have had the strength to remove that stone had they had to. They would have had to get somebody to do that. And they did not know that God had already taken care of the details for them. There's a lot of details that God's already taken care of for us. We just don't realize it. But as they arrived at the tomb, the stone was rolled away, and Mark doesn't add the details and that the angel had rolled the stone away. Matthew mentions it, but the resurrection of Jesus had made the women worries and cares unnecessary. And our worries and cares today are unnecessary because Jesus has arose from the grave. He is no longer in there. That these women were wanting to show honor to Jesus by anointing his body. And they became the first human witnesses of the resurrection of Christ. But yet, let me say again, a court of law would not accept the testimony of women. That wasn't going to do it. The simple fact, I think argues even more the realization of the resurrection. Like I say, anyone making up a story would surely start with the most trustworthy witnesses. You wouldn't, if I'm making this up and I need some witnesses to back me up, I want to get witnesses that are trustworthy. I'm going to take women that they're not going to take their word for it. So I understand that, and I just don't, we can ask why and what and all of that, but just why is it so hard for people to believe the truth of the resurrection? If it's not, as Paul says, and if this life only we have hope, we're of all men most miserable. If there's no resurrection from the dead, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, we're not going to rise from the dead. He's the first, and we're going to follow him. Now let's drop down to verses 5 and 8. And entering into the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, clothed in a long white garment, and they were affrighted. And he said unto them, Be not afraid. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, which was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. Behold the place where they lay him. But go your way, tell his disciples and Peter, we're going to talk about that in just a little bit, just kind of emphasize that he go before you into Galilee, and you shall see him, as he said unto you. And, he told them this is going to happen, but they went away from the cross, went away from the tomb, terrified and hiding. And then in verse 8, and the women went out quickly, and fled from the tomb, for for they trembled and were amazed, neither said they anything to any man, because they were afraid. If they passed people on the way back to where the disciples was at, they didn't say anything to anybody. But like we've talked about, I already talked about this, and I get ahead of myself in the lesson sometimes. But the stone was rolled away, and again, not to let Jesus out, but to allow witnesses into the tomb. They needed evidence of his resurrection. Not only did God provide the way into the tomb, but he also provided a host to explain to them. This young man in a white garment, Mark never calls him an angel. He doesn't do that. I think maybe other places they are referred to as angels, but people that were dressed in white apparel in biblical times usually appeared to people, and so they did that. And each one they mentioned two angels that were present, and two was the number required for a testimony to be verified. It had to be two witnesses to that. And this does not mean that Mark was mistaking in any way when we think about that, but he was merely focusing on the one who did the speaking. He's focusing on that one and that one only. And so they were frightened, and I think this word used to describe somebody who is amazed or dumbfounded. They were expecting Jesus' corpse, not a angelic being. They weren't expecting that. Human encounter, when they had encounters with angels, they were always afraid, weren't they? They had bowed down, and as they always did, he said, "Be not afraid." Like I say, they start the conversation by trying to calm people down, and this angel confirms that indeed the tomb of Jesus, referring to him as the Jesus of Nazareth. Second, the angel affirms his resurrection. He is risen. He is not here. The body was not stolen. People say that today. Some people want to believe that today, that the body was stolen. It was not. God had emptied it, and the angel points to the place where go look, there's where he was. There's where the body was. And this was where a body would lay in a tomb like that. The body would lay there till it decomposed, and then the bones were taken and put in a bone box so the tomb could be used at another time. And so, that's just the things about that. And, but the angel instructs them to go tell. They didn't have to go and explain the resurrection. They didn't explain that. They only needed to go and tell what they had witnessed. We have saw the empty tomb. We have saw the place where Jesus laid. He's no longer there, so he's resurrected, and the audience is going to be his disciples and Peter. Now, again, just to mention this, why would the angel specifically mention Peter? I don't know, but I'll tell you what I've read. Perhaps it was because of the pronounced failure Peter had experienced when he denied Jesus. He just told Jesus, "I'll die for you," and then he denies him. And so, he's really emotionally over that, I think. So maybe just to help him a little bit more, go let Peter know that I'm alive. And though the disciples were last seen fleeing, weren't they? They were fleeing the cross. That Jesus had plans for them. He had plans for them. The message that the angel says to the disciples that Jesus was on his way to Galilee, and they were supposed to meet him there. The women left the tomb. They were trembling. They were amazed and afraid, seeing an angel, witnessing an empty tomb, hearing a message that God wanted to use them. I think it would be overwhelming, because women were just not used in that type of situation. The fear of the moment caused the women to say nothing to anyone. They're going to later tell the disciples. They're going to tell them. Some of the earliest manuscripts, and I didn't know this, and it's what the writer says here, that Mark ends the gospel at verse 8. But later manuscripts includes verses 19 through 20. And so what has become the known as a longer ending, we just think about the point that, feel the astonishment of what it meant that Jesus was raised from the dead. Now let's look at verses 9 through 14. Now when Jesus was raised early the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had cast 7 devils, and she went and told them that had been with him, so they mourned and wept. And then they, when they heard that he was alive and had been seen of her, believed not. After that he appeared in another form unto them, and as they walked and went into the country, those 2 men that were there, and they went and told it unto the residents, neither believed they them. Afterwards he appeared unto 11 as they sat at meat, and upbraided with them with their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they believed not them which had seen him after he was arisen. So, here we are. He's arisen. He's told Mary to go tell. He's told these ladies to go tell. Just a brief summary here, 9 through 14 is just a brief summary of what's happened here. He first appears to Mary Magdalene and in the first of the week, and then his appearance is also mentioned in John chapter 20 and verse 16, which Mary was a second visit to the tomb, and just a recap of what's happened here. And she obeys the commandment of the angel, doesn't she? She took the message to the apostles, and John also mentions that she found them mourning and weeping. They were just like we would if a loved one had been passed and we'd put them in a grave. We would still be mourning and weeping and lost in sorrow that Jesus had died. And like I say, that's a natural human reaction. And when she told them he was alive and had been seen of her, they believed not. Okay, I don't believe you. What Thomas said, unless I see him, I'm not going to believe. And their initial reaction, and I think relatively so, was totally unexpected, as the resurrection of the dead is not a daily news item. It's not something you hear every day. What they needed was their own encounter with the risen Lord. Someone else's encounter was not enough for them. Let me just mention this. If you haven't had a personal encounter with Jesus Christ as personal Savior, then you're not going to make heaven. I don't care how many friends you have, I don't know how many family you have that have him, but you have to have your personal experience. Jesus with the 2 disciples that are walking down the Emmaus Road, and appears to be a shortened version when the 2 report the appearance to the other disciple. Again, I don't believe you. The woman had difficulty believing. The disciples had difficulty believing. The wider group of Jesus' followers had difficult believing. They each had to overcome, and again, this is individual, they each had to overcome their unbelief and discover the truth that Jesus had indeed raised from the dead. Still the same today. It's individual. You have to accept him on an individual basis, accept the fact that he died, that he arose, that he ascended, and he did forgive sin. And so it's not a group decision. It's an individual decision. And then Mark adds one final post-resurrection appearance of Jesus in verse 14. This time he appears to the 11 and rebukes them for their unbelief. Now, this could likely a reaccount of Luke chapter 24, verses 36 through 34 or 44. The disciples were reclining at the table when Jesus appeared to them. That's the normal position for eating at that time. And he rebukes them for not believing them which had seen him after the resurrection. He says, I've sent you witnesses, and you don't believe. And I think this is again in reference to the testimony of Mary Magdalene to the disciples. She told them she had encountered with Jesus, yet they persisted in their unbelief. What's it take for you to give up your unbelief? Believe in Jesus. So when as the day grows forward, they're no longer going to live in sorrow, fear, or unbelief. They're going to embrace the message of the gospel and share the gospel of the risen Lord. That's what we need to do today. Share the gospel of a risen Lord. I hope I didn't take too much of your time this morning. I hope it brings back to you a remembrance of the things that we need to do. And as I said, this is the last lesson in our quarter in the book of Mark. We'll start a brand new quarter in December. If you want a copy of that, contact us here at the church, and we'll see that you get a copy of that. May God bless you is our prayer.